Episode 11 Rabinoe, Wizard Extraordinaire. Rabinoe, Eris, and Gareth paused to look over their handiwork. The trio were currently standing in the middle of the chateau, looking over the pyre they had built for Linrem. So far it had been a quiet and somber affair, sniffles and stifled sobs the only sounds to break the silence. It wasn't until the pyre was nearly complete, Gareth straightening the final row of logs, that Rabinoe broke the silence. "Gareth?" "Hmm?" The old man looked up, sweat and tears streaking through the fine layer of dirt and wood dust beginning to cling to his skin. "How did you meet Linrem?" he asked, pensively. Gareth raised his eyebrows, clearly a little taken aback by the question. "How I met Linrem?" he asked, and Rabinoe nodded. "I know how Eris came to be Eris," Rabinoe continued, "and you both know how my little hand tried to pick Lin's pocket, but I don't think I've ever heard the story of how you met Linrem." The old man paused, drawing a handkerchief from his pocket and wiping his sweaty face before stowing it back in a pocket. "Not a very thrilling story, I'm afraid." Gareth fidgeted with the hem of his tunic. "Master Linrem had conducted some business with my previous master, Stev Steelheart. When Master Steelheart decided to betray Linrem and turn him over to the Empire, this was during a time when the royal family opposed Lin's freedom, Linrem decided he no longer needed to work with the man. He made to leave Steelheart's estate, foregoing the completion of the job that had brought him there. When Steelheart made to stop Linrem, that was when things got interesting. Rumors say that the man's heart is still encased solidly in steel, courtesy of Lin, though I don't think those are necessarily true. Rumors or not, Linrem soundly defeated the man. Before he scampered off into the night, he turned to me. He said, 'Looks like you're unemployed. Want a job?' I said yes." "So wait," Rabinoe asked curiously. "Linrem covered the guy's heart with steel?" Gareth chuckled. "So the rumors say." "That's amazing," Rabinoe laughed. "I'll have to remember that one. I wonder how he did it." "I wouldn't think about it too hard," Eris smirked. "I'm fairly certain Lin did nothing of the sort, but I do recall him spreading rumors that he did, always endeavoring to add to his own mystique." "You think he was lying?" Rabinoe asked her. "Seems like a silly thing to lie about." However, no sooner had the words left his mouth than he knew them not to be true. If there was one thing Linrem had been a master at, subterfuge was near the top of the list. When Rabinoe had heard townsfolk talking about Lin and the things he had done, both for them and what they whisper he did elsewhere, it was with the utmost reverence. Linrem may have been an eccentric and quite likely insane will mage, but he had spent countless hours helping anyone who had asked him, whether or not they could afford to pay for his services. The old man had once told him that over half of the supplies in his alchemy tower were given to him by folks he had helped over the years, showing him gratitude and appreciation in the only ways they could. Eris looked at Rabinoe with a twinkle in her eye. "Since when did you know Lin to care about how silly a thing was to lie about? Besides," she paused and looked over at the pyre sadly, before turning back to Rabinoe, "he found it wickedly entertaining." The trio laughed with the shared memories of the man, reveling in the tales he had weaved and the things he had done. They talked of their favorite memories, sorrowful tears joining the laughter and the sighs. When silence finally fell amongst them, the sun creeping slowly below the horizon, the weight of it was profound. Rabinoe looked to Eris, who nodded, and went with him to retrieve Linrem. When they returned, Lin swathed in fluttering white linens that made his still form seem ethereal in Rabinoe's arms. Gareth had finished the final preparations for the pyre. Together, they slowly and lovingly placed Lin's body on top, standing back, huddled together against the encroaching darkness. Gareth produced a torch. He handed it to Rabinoe. "I think you should do the honor, Mr. Rabbit." Rabinoe smiled sadly at the manservant, inclining his head and taking the torch from him. He looked forlornly at the tip and thought, "Light!" Within seconds, flames were licking greedily at the tip, crackling and popping as it roared softly into existence. Rabinoe stared at the torch for several long moments, the finality sinking into the pit of his stomach and twisting the joy they had been sharing at Lin's life to despair and the acute pain that comes deep in one's chest, in the very heart of our souls, at the loss of a deeply loved one. Sobs began shaking his small frame, softly at first, and then so violently the tip of the torch swayed like it was dancing. And then Eris was there, perched on his shoulder, with a paw pressed lightly against his face. Gareth drew closer and put withered old hand on Rabinoe's other shoulder. Together, he felt them lend him the strength he needed. As one, the trio lit the funeral pyre. Excuse me. As the flames spread and raced to cover the logs, hungrily feeding on the wood, something incredible happened. Once the flames reached the top, where the bundle of cloth covered Lin, they began dancing wildly. They reached high into the sky, long arms of flame licking the early evening air. Then they sparkled, starting at the top and shimmering down to the bottom like a cascading wave. Once the sparkles reached the bottom of the pyre, the flames pulsed brightly and then swirled as they changed color from the bright orange and reds to a vibrant sky blue. The trio gasped as the fire took on the very color of Linrem's will, swirling merrily. From the flames, creatures and critters began appearing, their features made entirely of dancing blue fire. Butterflies and birds, field mice and voles, even what looked like a fiery blue unicorn appeared, tossing its majestic mane before galloping into nothing. Finally, the blue flames pulsed brilliantly once more. At the top, an ethereal, fiery figure had emerged, standing there, looking down at them with a brilliant smile. Linrem's spirit took one last look at those he had called family. He then sprouted great flaming wings, transforming into a massive phoenix. The magical bird called forlornly into the night, and then took off, soaring into the sky. As the phoenix left the pyre, it took all of the sparkling sky blue energy with it, returning the flames to their cheery orange and red color. The brilliant phoenix circled the chateau, crying out its final goodbyes before it flew off into the night, finally, unequivocally free. When Rabinoe awoke the next morning, eyes crusty from crying, he was surprised to find Eris curled up at the foot of his bed. He sat up and looked at the cat, who either hadn't awoken yet or was pretending not to notice Rabinoe had. He reached over and scratched the cat behind the ears, quickly producing a pleased purring from Eris. He scratched a little more and then sighed, stretching as he began getting out of bed. Eris cracked an eyelid. "Why did you stop?" she asked morosely. "That was lovely." "And a good morning to you as well, Eris," Rabinoe said as he climbed out and began preparing for the day. He went over to his wash basin and splashed the cold water on his face, wiping away the crusty remains of his grief and starting the day fresh. He then went over to his wardrobe and selected the clothes he would wear for the day, his usual tan-colored pants and tunic. Taking them and laying them out on the bed next to Eris, he began changing out of his pajamas. "It was a good morning," Eris said, stretching out languidly on the bed. "But then you stopped scratching me." Rabinoe chuckled. "Well, I certainly can't spend all day petting you, Eris." "Is that what heaven is?" Eris pondered, rolling onto her back. "Because that would be wonderful." "What?" Rabinoe asked. "Someone petting you all day? Wouldn't that get old?" "Absolutely not," Eris answered, rolling back onto her belly. "You're not covered in a fur coat, so you wouldn't understand. But human hands have a way of scratching that my paws just cannot compete with. Especially round my ears. I can never quite scratch that itch like you could." She emphasized this point by rubbing against Rabinoe as he reached out to grab the clothes he had laid out on the bed. "Oh, come on, Rabbit," she purred. "You know you want to." "You may be ridiculously adorable, Eris," Rabinoe said as he slid his arms into his tunic and pulled it over his head. "But once again, you open your mouth, the effect is ruined." "Ouch," Eris said reproachfully. "And here I thought we were starting off the morning on a positive foot." Rabinoe chuckled. "Don't even start." "Now I have to punish you." "For what?" Rabinoe guffawed. "Calling you on your crap?" Eris sniffed indignantly. "Insinuating that my advanced intellect and capacity to pontificate at great length both mar my superior beauty and radiance," she paused and looked at him sharply, "is not calling me on my crap, Rabbit. It's being a jackass. Really, no proper respect for a lady and her feelings." "You aren't a lady, and I don't particularly care about your feelings, Eris," Rabinoe said flatly. "Nice try, though." "You are so very unpleasant in the morning," Eris said dryly. "Did you know that? What am I saying? Of course you didn't." Rabinoe scooped up his discarded pajamas from the floor and threw them at the impossible cat, who scampered away, dashing across the room and leaping clear to the top of the wardrobe. She sat on her haunches and regarded Rabinoe with murder in her eyes. "How rude." Rabinoe shrugged at the cat, turning and walking from his room. As he left the chambers, he heard a distinctive thud and the soft patter that told him Eris had jumped down and was following him. He smiled to himself and made his way to the surface. Opening the door in the middle of the chateau released the soft hues of the morning sky to dance into the stairwell as the sun ploddingly rose to shine upon the world. It wasn't quite dawn yet, seeing as the sun had not crested the horizon, but it would be doing so at any moment, so it was close enough for Rabinoe. He proceeded to begin his morning routine without even thinking about it, stretching and warming up his body, preparing to take on the pinwheel. Are you still doing that ridiculous exercise? Eris asked from where she sat upon a crate, watching Rabinoe with an air of supreme boredom. Why shouldn't I? Rabinoe asked, collecting the pole and buckets and filling the buckets with water from the well. Because Lynn isn't here to make you do it, Eris replied. I thought that much was obvious. Rabinoe frowned. Just because Linrem isn't here to make me doesn't mean I cannot benefit from continued exercise. He hefted the pole and buckets onto one shoulder and began climbing the ladder that led to the beginning of the pinwheel. Reaching the top, he settled the pole across his shoulders, a bucket on either end, and took a deep breath. He stepped onto the raised rail and began shuffling along. Rabinoe didn't know if it was more determination to prove Eris wrong, or a desire to complete the training his master had set before him, but whatever the cause, he found it exponentially easier to progress along the rail. Even as he crested the halfway mark, a spot he had seldom ever reached, he had barely broken a sweat. His anxiety spiked. At the same time, a countering drive and desire flared just as intensely. He had to stop focusing on how far he was getting. The bubbling, excited energy that came with the prospect of success might flounder his footing. So instead of looking forward, he focused on every step, sure-footed as he slid his weight from foot to foot. Finally, sweat now beading heavily and running down his face, Rabinoe reached the pinnacle of the pinwheel. For the very first time in all of his training, he had done it. Rabinoe sank to his knees atop the highest building in the chateau and cried. Of course he had to complete the pinwheel after Lynn was no longer around to see it. His master would never know that he defeated this hated exercise. You know, Rabinoe jumped, looking over at Eris, who had appeared next to him on the rooftop. There is a reason why you never completed this exercise before. What? Rabinoe asked, eyeing the cat suspiciously, like the death of my master finally removed the block in my mind that was self-sabotaging. Eris chuckled. No, Rabbit. Well, Rabinoe frowned. Spit it out, then. Eris sighed. I do wish you were better with banter and wordplay. She licked her paw daintily. All right, troglodyte. You were unable to complete the pinwheel because Lynn actively stopped you. He thought it was hilarious. Actively stopped me? Rabinoe asked. What do you mean? What does it sound like, Rabbit? Eris continued, bemused. He pushed you off every time. Pushed me off? Oh, yes, Eris said smugly. Didn't you notice how the wind was noticeably absent this morning? Rabinoe opened his mouth to argue and then paused. He hadn't noticed the lack of wind, but now that Eris had mentioned it, the absence of the very hindrance that impeded his progress in every other attempt did seem odd. You're saying that Lynn made the wind blow to push me off? That's exactly what I'm saying, Eris said. You should have heard how much he giggled over it. Rabinoe stared at the cat for a long moment, a maelstrom of emotions assaulting his brain. It made sense that Linrem would do such a thing. The man had been an incorrigible mischief maker. Furthermore, in a training sense, it also fit into place. Why wouldn't Lynn want to challenge his apprentice? He must have known keeping Rabinoe from completing it would drive him to try harder and harder. And through his struggles, Rabinoe had grown much stronger. Overwhelming grief and joy joined hands and danced in his brain. Without saying anything further, Rabinoe sat on the edge of the roof, looking out at the sun rising over the plains. He reached a hand out and petted Eris as tears rolled down his cheeks. The pair sat, watching the cool dawn. Some time later, long after the sun had finished pulling itself from its nightly confinement, the somber silence was broken by Gareth clearing his throat behind the pair. Rabinoe started and craned around to seek out the source of the sound, relaxing once he realized it was Gareth. As soon as the pair looked at Gareth, he spoke. "Master Rabbit, Mistress Eris," he nodded at them in turn. "We have some very important business to discuss." "Gareth," Rabinoe moaned. "Come on, man. We only just put Lynn to rest. Can't it wait until tomorrow?" "I'm afraid not," Gareth answered. "We must review Master Linrem's last will and testament." Rabinoe blinked. "He left a will?" "Of course he did," Eris answered. "Did you think he would leave you without instructions?" "Well," Rabinoe spluttered, "I didn't think about it, I guess. I also didn't think Lynn had such, foresight." Eris chuckled. "The man wasn't omnipotent. He knew his days were numbered, and I also think he knew Eridan was coming for him. I think he sent us to that pine grove on purpose." "What?" Rabinoe asked in shock. "Why would he do that?" "Isn't it obvious?" Eris asked. "To keep you safe." Rabinoe opened his mouth, then closed it. He sat and thought about it for a long moment before responding. "I suppose that does make sense." "Of course it does," Eris said. "Lynn loved you. Of that you can be certain. He would not have let Eridan come anywhere near you as long as he could help it." Memories resurfaced in Rabinoe's brain. Conversations he had had with Linrem about Eridan. He distinctly remembered the wizened old man warning him fervently not to cross paths with Eridan at all costs. The mage did not play well with others, a fact made heartbreakingly real by the murder of his master, the man's own father. Gareth cleared his throat once more. "May we proceed to the office, then?" The pair nodded, and all together the three made their way off of the rooftops and below ground to the office that wasn't destroyed. As they entered the room, waves of more grief washed over Rabinoe as he remembered the many lessons he had shared with Lynn in this very room. Gareth walked behind the desk, standing instead of sitting in Lynn's chair. He motioned for Rabinoe to sit, and Eris leapt lithely onto the oak desk, plopping down and regarding the two with her big amber eyes. Rabinoe sat, and Gareth nodded to himself, removing a silver-chained necklace from where it had been nestled beneath his collar. On the end of the chain hung a small and intricate silver key. He pulled off the necklace and used the key to unlock a drawer in the desk that Rabinoe could not see. From the drawer, he removed a small, gleaming crystal, placing it reverently on the surface of the desk. The crystal was an oddity, though it was many-sided, as crystalline structures tend to be in nature. The sides were not polished, as if the crystal had been worked, though the effect was so subtle it was difficult to notice. These details were made even more difficult to ascertain, seeing as the crystal was glowing and pulsing with an inner light, a sky blue inner light. Gareth reached out once more, placing the tips of his index and middle finger on the crystal's surface. "I, Gareth, faithful servant of Linrem, hereby invoke Linrem's last will and testament. The crystal pulsed, faintly at first, and then so brightly Rabinoe had to cover his eyes with a raised hand to fend off the blinding rays. When the pulsing stopped, Rabinoe lowered his hand to find that a shining, sky-blue apparition of Linrem had appeared, standing over the crystal from which it projected. Lin smiled sadly as he looked down upon Rabinoe. "Master?" Rabinoe blinked, taken aback. "Sadly not," Eris said morosely from her perch on the desk. "Okay," said the apparition of Linrem. "Let's see here. Last will and testament." Excuse me. The image of Lin paused, stroking his beard pensively and appearing to pace, though the image never moved from where it was anchored above the crystal. "Hells, this is hard," he said sadly. "All right. Well, here it is. Rabinoe, Eris, Gareth, I'm afraid my time is limited. Now, every person has their time to go, and I certainly wish to see Rabbit blossom into the promising mage he is becoming. However," the apparition paused and wiped an ethereal tear from his face, "I do not believe that that will be possible. I won't speak on what may become of me, because I am not certain, and I don't want to be putting ideas in anyone's head. Rabbit. First and foremost, if I was murdered by Eridan, who is my son as you should know by now, then I forbid everyone from seeking revenge. What transpired between the two of us has nothing to do with you three. If the outcome is my demise, then simply consider it the closing of my own book and the start of a fresh chapter for all of you." He paused again, looking down gravely. "Rabinoe," he said softly, "I wish I could have taught you more, shared more of my knowledge with you. You have immense potential, my boy. However, my death does not signal the end of your tutelage. Second, Rabinoe, you are to begin a pilgrimage, beginning tomorrow. Your destination is not a place but a goal. I want you to travel far and wide, just as I did in my youth. Everywhere you go, you are to seek out people in need and use your abilities to help them. Ask for no reward. Furthermore, from this point forth, you are to be known as Rabinoe, Wizard Extraordinaire." He said this last part with a flourish and a wicked, gleaming smile. "That part is non-negotiable, Rabbit. Now, though your training is far from complete, you are already have enough of a grasp on the basics to progress further in your own. If I have been slain by my son, then my Book of Will should have appeared before you. If it hasn't, well, let's hope it has. You are not yet strong enough to even open that book, Rabbit, and I forbid you from doing so. The book will remain here in the chateau. Third, to assist in the furthering of your tutelage, he fidgeted with the cuff of his robe. Sorry about this one, old friend. I command Eris to accompany you on your travels. What in the hells did you just say, old man? Eris rose to her feet and snarled at the apparition. You dare command me from the grave? Now, I just know that you will be ever so thrilled by my decisions, Eris. I won't do it, she said flatly. And I'm sure by this point you are angrily refusing. Well, that's one way to put it, Rabinoe said, regarding Eris warily. Which is why the apparition rose a hand and snapped their fingers. A halo of sky-blue energy appeared over Eris's head, spinning wildly. Nearly as soon as it had appeared, the halo sank quickly around Eris's neck and cinched tight, flaring brightly. When the sky-blue energy faded, Eris was left wearing a black leather collar with a small golden bell adorning the neck. Eris roared. The sound was louder and more ferocious than anything Rabinoe had heard before. "You dare collar me? Me? You will rue the day you ever considered binding Eris the Eternal to your will, Linrem!" The apparition smiled sadly as if he had heard every word. "Sorry again, old friend." "You are no friend of mine," she snarled, leaping from the desk and vanishing with a small pop. "But I feared you would not stay by Rabinoe's side otherwise, and your help will be invaluable to the boy." There was a loud crack, and suddenly Eris was sitting on the desk again, looking furious yet befuddled. "You're probably discovering the power that collar holds right about now," the apparition continued with a sad twinkle in his eye. "You will be unable to go further than 100 yards from Rabinoe without the collar pulling you back. You are now anchored to him, Eris." Eris looked from the apparition to Rabinoe. "I will murder you in your sleep, boy," she said softly and full of menace. "Oh," Linrem said, "and do try not to threaten his life, Eris." The wily mage seemed to have foreseen how this interaction would play out. "I won't go into details, but let us just say that collar will also prevent you from doing so." "We shall see about that," she said, her fury boiling down to a hot simmer. The apparition paused, seeming to gather their thoughts. "I do not give you to these tasks lightly. Make no mistake, the world is about to change. There will be a power vacuum in Galita with my absence, and a rush to fill it. There will also be a large number of people who wish to take advantage of my passing to loot the chateau, perhaps growing their own power through the theft of mine. Which is why I send you away from this place. As soon as the two of you leave, the chateau will be hidden. The working I put into place is vast and too complicated to explain here. Just know that the chateau will vanish once you leave, and will not reappear until you are strong enough and wise enough to claim what I leave for you, which is the vast wealth of my knowledge and supplies." "Gareth?" The apparition turned, looking back at the manservant, who bowed his head in acknowledgment. "I thank you for your many years of dedicated and faithful service, my friend. You are free to do as you wish. Our contract is fulfilled, and you know where you can find your payment. However, if you do not wish to go, the chateau could use someone to watch over it. The choice is yours." Limrim bowed to the man before turning back to Rabinoe. "Though it was known that I had taken on an apprentice, no one really knows who you are, Rabbit. This will be your greatest strength," Linrem began. "You must remember what I told you of other will mages. Be wary. More than anything else, you must steer clear of the king and the royal family of Galita. The current king has tried on many occasions to bring me to heel, and I have no doubts that he will do the same to you. Stay away until you are strong enough to say no to the man and walk away with your head intact." "Well," the apparition said, smiling sadly, "I do believe that is everything. I'm sorry for leaving you all so suddenly, my friends, and I do hope that you can forgive me for the selfish things I have done. I love you all." With one last smile, the apparition shivered and vanished. Once again, Linrem was gone.